So without a doubt, one of the hottest bass fishing baits on the market today is a Damiki rig, but with so many different types and so many different heads, sometimes it can be really a minefield as to which way you need to go and what baits you need to throw. In today's video, I'm going to break down the exact baits that I like to throw to get bit when literally nothing else will, and it's a video where we catch a ton of fish and we give you all kinds of in-depth breakdowns. I'm even a special guest in one of my buddies' boat who you probably watch his YouTube channel, but if you want to know who that is and you're not sure how to fish a Damiki rig, stick around because this is going to be the video for you. We are going to show you how to fish it without any forward-facing sonar and with some forward-facing sonar so you can see all the different angles we use on this bait and really how to put a ton of fish in the boat on a day where we could not get bit on anything else. And you heard it right, I said we because we have a special guest in the boat today. Rather, I'm a special guest in somebody else's boat today, so we're going to be out on the water actually bass fishing again without a kayak, and it's going to be a great day. So stick around. If you have any questions on this bait or you're not sure how to fish a Damiki rig, this is the video for you. In the fall, fish are chasing bait fish like absolute mad, and one of the best baits to do that with, like we talked about in the intro there, is a Damiki rig. Right here we have the Z-Man Scented Jerk Shads, which is probably one of the most popular baits out there on the market today as far as using it for a Damiki rig. And today we're fishing a river system, and I have my buddy Nathan Quince with me in the boat. He's generous enough to let me hop in the boat with him. And so today we're gonna be out here throwing this to try to show you how I like to rig it, how I like to throw it in some of these different situations to really catch some of these fish that really get a lot of pressure. So we're gonna get up here, we're gonna show you everything we're doing, we're gonna break down the gear a little bit later, and we're gonna catch some fish. So like I said, we are in a river system right now, and one thing that we're doing is we're targeting some isolated rock piles that these fish are setting up on. But as you can see right now, the current is actually pushing us upstream instead of downstream. And so this is pretty much every river fisherman's worst nightmare, because as the current's coming down, that's how you want your bait to be fished. But since the wind is pushing us up and we have pretty much no current coming down, we're going opposite of what these fish really want. And so your traditional baits, your tubes, your Ned rigs, all the baits that you would normally like to drag and fish just really don't work that well because those fish see it right off the bat and they don't want to eat it because of how it's moving opposite against everything else that how it's supposed to be. But one of the baits that you can still catch these fish with is this Damiki rig because you keep it over their heads and you can change how you cast it. So even though we're getting pushed upstream, we can still cast that bait out and hold it above their heads naturally and pull it downstream. It's hard to do that with pretty much any other bait out there, but this one you can still get it done with. And so I'm going to break down a cast for you so you can see exactly how I'm working this bait and you can see how we're keeping it over top of these fish's heads, because I think that's one of the things that people overlook is how to fish this bait. Because if you don't keep it over their heads properly, you really spook those fish because they get kind of afraid of how it gets below them. Because if you think about when a fish sees a bait fish, there's supposed to be that fear response, and that bait fish is supposed to try to flee away from it. Because fish most of the time feed up, especially smallmouth. They love to feed up. That's why the eyes are on top of their heads for the most part, so they can look up. And so that's why this bait works so well, because they feel the need to ambush this bait when you keep it over top of their heads. So right now I'm going to show you a cast and how I keep it over top of their heads so that those fish will come up from below it, not be afraid of it, and actually commit to the bait. So again, we have these isolated rock piles that I'm targeting because these fish are on them to try to use as a current break. And so we're going to throw this Damiki rig, again that Z-Man Scented Jerk Shads, over their heads with a 3/16 ounce head. And again, I'll break down the head size later because that's also really critical to catching more fish. So we have that 3/16 ounce head and we're gonna put it over top of these fish's heads so that we can see how they're actually gonna come up and eat it. So right here you can see there's a rock pile out in front of us. I wanna cast it upstream so that way I'm gonna bring that bait down naturally. And the key is to stop that bait before it hits the bottom. So I'm gonna use this Panoptix to try to get it on top of there where we can see that fish. But then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slowly twitch it above the bottom, keeping it over top of those fish. Because if it falls below the fish, they really do not like to commit to it. So right there's the rock pile. I'm going to throw it above the rock pile so that way it will fall down to the fish. And by the time the current gets to it, it will still be in the strike zone of the isolated cover that we have there. And then I'm just going to slowly twitch that and pull it over top of that rock pile, and it will drift over top of it with the current, looking like a natural minnow that is wounded and just coming downstream with the current. That is the key to that right there, keeping it right over top of their heads, just like that. So that way it flows right downstream. Again, I cast it above the rock pile to let it fall down, letting it get about 2 feet above the bottom, and that's where I'm gonna stop it because I wanna keep it just over top of those fish's heads so they have to come up to it. This is also gonna keep you from getting hung up and losing baits, which is one thing in a river we all struggle with. Oh, that one did.
That's big one. That's big one. I'll double up.
Yeah, that one's not small. Yeah, we'll do the old lay down and grab them. That's more along the lines of what we're looking for right there. Big fish right in the nose right there. Beautiful. Beautiful on the Damiki rig. But that's what you catch when you're fishing a Damiki rig like that. Even in conditions like this, we're still hammering fish, probably more so than anybody else out here, but that's what we're looking for right there. So real quick, the head size is super important. Right here, I just have a 3/16 ounce ball head on this bait specifically, but one thing I want to show you is the knot that I tie for it, because most people tie just a regular knot, and that doesn't give the bait as much free movement as I would like the bait to have. So what I do is I actually tie a loop knot for it, because what that does is that actually gives the bait a lot more roll, which is something that is really, really important with this, because you'll notice when I fish this bait, I shake my rod tip. And what that shaking my rod tip is doing is actually getting that bait to kick back and forth as it's coming through the water. And so you just get a little bit of belly roll, and it looks like a bait fish that's trying to hold its equilibrium. Because that's what happens when a bait fish is dying, is it has that air bladder in it, and it's really fighting to stay upright. And so they're kind of having that rock and that roll, and that's what this bait really does a good job at imitating. And that's why even when the current is super slow like we have here, it really still gets those fish to eat, because it's one of those baits that even when the current isn't moving, it still looks natural coming down through there with the right head size. And so to tie this loop knot, all I'm gonna do is make an overhand knot and leave that overhand knot open like this. Then all you do is you run it through the eye of your hook like so, run it up to that overhand knot, and then I'm gonna tie basically a clinch knot with that overhand knot in there. So I'm gonna wrap up 5-6 times, just like so. And then I'm going to insert my line back down through that gap that I just created with that overhand knot at the same time. So I'm going to run it down through there. And if you have a different loop knot that you like to use, by all means, but this is just a loop knot that I really like to use because it gives that bait more rock and roll. Because now you see as that bait is moving, as that bait moves, this loop knot is going to give it a whole lot more action and a whole lot more room to work. And so that's why I like to use that, just because it gives it a little bit more of a standout presentation in a crowded area. And so now we have the bait that I'm using. This is a 3.5-inch Z-Man scented jerk shad, like I talked about. Imitates a lot of the bait size that we have in here perfectly. Because in a river system like this, we don't have really, really big gizzard shad. We have a lot of small shiners, and we have a lot of small other miscellaneous bait fish. And so this is that electric shad color, which is probably one of the hottest colors out there on the market. I will have that link down below, as well as the other gear that I'm throwing this on. But all I'm gonna do is you wanna rig it perfectly straight, because that's gonna be really, really key. And on these scented jerk shads, they have a line run right across the middle of the back of this. So they have it running all the way down through, so you can see that your hook goes all the way down through perfectly straight and in line. Because if you have it off even a little bit, your bait's not gonna roll right. And so all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna insert this hook right at the nose like so, making sure that I rig it perfectly straight. And then what I'm gonna do is, a lot of people struggle with these Elastec baits to hook them up straight because they try to push it. And if you'll notice, pushing it doesn't really get it up there all the way. So you have to grab the nose of the bait and pull it, and it'll snap into place. So right there you can see that bait is perfectly rigged on there and ready to go down there to catch some more fish. So the reason that a Damiki rig works so good in the river system like we're in right now is because most baits get hung up. But if you look at some of these rock piles, what these fish do is they get down inside of them to fight the current. And even when there is no current, they still want to be related to those rock piles. And so what we're doing by keeping this bait over top of this is you're getting the most active fish because it looks the most natural. You're not getting in that fish's face at all. You're not making a lot of noise by bumping into the rocks. You're just keeping it straight over top of that fish's head, and the current is naturally pulling your bait along. And so you're going right over top of the rock piles, whether it's a boulder, a log, any kind of isolated cover. That's where those fish are going to be in, And that's where you're going to get your biggest groups of fish. And so that's why we're going around targeting these individual rock piles, because we know there's a small group of fish, and just by floating this, or strolling is what most people call it today, you can really get some of the biggest fish, the most active fish, and not pressure the group of fish as much as you would by throwing a tube or a finesse football jig or a drop shot, any of those baits through there, because that's going to be getting hung up, it's going to be banging into the rocks, it's going to be bumping into those fish. This doesn't do any of that, and so it's just the most natural presentation that you can put in front of these fish. So another big thing that we've talked about is the bait size that we're throwing here. I mentioned that this is the perfect size for the system that I'm fishing in with this 3.5 inch size. That's not always the case depending on where you're at. If you're fishing somewhere like Lake Gunnersville where you have giant gizzard shad all throughout the system, you might want to be throwing a 5-inch scented jerk shad or even a 7-inch. I've seen the 7-inch work wonders when you're fishing around giant largemouth like that. But here in this river system loaded with a ton of smallmouth, we're really not going to catch anything over 6 pounds. And honestly, 5 pounds is pretty much the limit when you get into some of these situations. And so we're just mostly catching numbers of fish, which is why we opted for this 3.5 inch size. But you also want to think about the size of fish that you're around and the size of the bait fish that you're around. So if you're fishing and you see giant schools of bait and you see fish blowing up on it, try to match that size of that bait fish. Or if you're in a school and you keep catching the smaller fish, put on a bigger one to try to see if you can't get some of those bigger fish in there, because that's going to be the difference maker of catching a lot of big fish or a few big fish or a lot of numbers or just a few numbers.
Yeah, mine's crooked as shit and tied with a pound. Okay. We're on him now.
I get the little one.
We're on him now.
Right in the roof of the mouth, and that's where you're going to hook every one of those fish, is right in the roof, just because of how that presentation comes through the water horizontally like that. As it's coming through and those fish eat it, you have nothing stopping you from putting a perfect hook set on those fish. But that is a beautiful smallmouth. As always, guys, we are going to end with the good word. And what I want to talk about today is a story in the Bible. And what I specifically want to talk about is a reaction to a story in the Bible. And so one story that I absolutely love is Jesus heals a man who is blind. He's been blind his entire life. And so he comes, Jesus happens to be walking by. The guy cries out, puts his hand on him and says, "Brother, see," something along that lines. And the guy instantly is healed. The problem was it was on what is known as the Sabbath, which is their day of rest. And the reaction to this by all of the people of the church, all of the high priests and all of the high elders, said that this can't be true because nobody who is of the church would ever heal somebody on the Sabbath. They couldn't get over the fact that he had healed somebody on the Sabbath. They couldn't see that he had healed somebody who was blind their entire life. Everybody else who was outside of the church, everybody who wasn't an elder, who wasn't somebody that was high up in the church, was just amazed and joyful that he healed somebody who could not see, right? They didn't even care that it was the Sabbath. It doesn't matter. He healed somebody who was blind. The problem was he did it on a Sabbath. That was what these guys saw, and that's what they couldn't get over. So the reason that I brought that up is because I've been talking to a lot of different people about going to church. I invite a lot of different people to church, and there's a lot of people that have a bad taste in their mouth because of the experiences that they had in church. Because what ruins a good church is by judgmental people. You know what I mean? It's how often do you see somebody that looks like they shouldn't be in a church? Somebody covered in tattoos, somebody with their hair all messed up, somebody comes in with a hat, blue jeans, and all dirty because they just got out of work, working a double, and they came to church like that. Guys, it doesn't matter about any of that. It matters that you open your heart to Jesus, and it matters that you want to be there because you love Jesus and you think Jesus is Lord. And so if you see that in your church, try to be the opposite of that. Try to just be welcoming. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter where we come from, what your background is. If you love Jesus, it's not going to matter anyway. At the end of the day, we're all going to get judged by somebody, and it's not going to be you or me. You know what I mean? And so when you're at the end of your rope and you have to answer for all the things that you did, does judging somebody who decided to give their life to Jesus and decided to turn their life around, is that what you want to be known for? No, you don't want to have to answer to that. And so a church shouldn't be a place of judgment. It should be a place of acceptance and love. That is what church is about. And that is what it shows in this book no matter what. You look at all the different characters, all of the 12 disciples, they all came from different backgrounds. I mean, look at Paul, who was Saul. He killed a bunch of people, a lot of people, persecuted people. Matthew, the tax collector. Everybody comes from different backgrounds, and it doesn't matter what your background is or what you've done in your past. It just matters that you surrender your heart to Jesus, and that comes above all else. And it shouldn't matter about anything else. So thank you guys so much for watching. God bless every single one of you guys. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and hope to see you guys in the next video.